Israel has rejected the US-backed proposal for a ceasefire with Hezbollah, and this even as Washington insisted the truce plan was coordinated with Israel.
Well, the United States and allies issued a joint call for a 21-day halt in fighting in Lebanon after Israeli airstrikes targeted the Iran-backed group, and it killed hundreds and displaced tens of thousands, which all happened earlier this week. Now, the White House said that the ceasefire offer had been coordinated with Israel before it was announced.
Israel was aware of this statement. And now, what I can tell you right now, we are having continued discussions that is happening with our teams in New York. And I'm not going to get into private diplomatic engagement, but I can assure you these conversations are continuing.
But landing in the U.S. to address the UNGA, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his government has not responded to the proposal. He said he has ordered the military to continue fighting with full force against Hezbollah until all goals are achieved.
During the flight, I gave approval for the elimination of the head of the UAV unit and other things, and he was eliminated. Our policy is clear. We are continuing to strike Hezbollah with full force, and we will not stop until we reach all our goals. Chief among them, the return of the residents of the north securely to their homes.
Netanyahu's statement came hours after Israel's National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir threatened to withdraw the support of his party from the coalition government if Netanyahu agreed to a ceasefire in Lebanon. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron said it will be a mistake for Israeli Prime Minister to refuse a ceasefire in Lebanon. He noted that the plan supported by the United States and the EU had been prepared with Netanyahu himself.
Furthermore, hundreds of pro-Palestinian demonstrators gathered in New York and walked towards the United Nations headquarters on Thursday. And that is ahead of Netanyahu's address at the United Nations.
Earlier, U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders introduced legislation to block arms sales to Israel. The joint resolutions of disapproval will prevent the transfer of more than $20 billion in offensive weapons to Israel. The Senate will vote on the resolutions when lawmakers reconvene in November. Sanders accused Israel of waging an all-out war against the Palestinian people.
And well, for more on this, we're now being joined by Dov Zakim from Washington, D.C. He's a senior advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome to World DNA, Mr. Zakim. Now, it is a new phase of war in West Asia. Just yesterday, there was a 21-day ceasefire plan proposed by U.S. and France. And according to the White House, it was backed by the Israeli Prime Minister. But upon his arrival in New York for the UNGA, he clearly said that he wants Israel to fight with Hezbollah with full force. What led to this backtracking by the Israeli Prime Minister?
Well, it's not really clear. First of all, thank you for having me. It's not clear that Netanyahu backtracked in this case. It's quite different from Gaza, where he's clearly been not interested in any kind of arrangement that would free hostages and have a ceasefire. As you heard the American spokesman say, the Israelis were aware of the offer. That's very different from accepting. And it's clear that Netanyahu, not only because of Ben-Gvir, I mean, he's got the public behind him, he does not want to accept it. And there are some very good reasons for him not to. 21 days is not going to stop Hezbollah from firing rockets and drones. They've already fired 10,000 since October 7th in starting a conflict that is not theirs. It's a Gaza conflict, driving out 60 to 70,000 people. Of course, Netanyahu is going to want his people to come back home. And by the way, in addition, which no one seems to talk about, Security Council Resolution 1701 made it very clear that Hezbollah should not have any of its forces south of the Litani River, which, of course, they have violated over and over again. So it's not just the extreme right-wingers who I've been arguing, including on this channel, that have blocked any kind of arrangement on Gaza, which is sorely needed. This has less to do with them. They're just showboating. It has much more to do with the sentiment of Israelis who feel that all these rockets and missiles that have been fired at them, including one that was fired from Iraq at Tel Aviv, they feel the Iranians are just trying to press them every which way, and they just don't want to put up with it.
Mrs. Hakim, I heard what you said, and you've said that they've not backtracked, and you're denying that fact that this is not a backtracking. I just want to quote something that John Kirby said, that I don't know why Netanyahu said what he said, and I don't know what his considerations were, whether they were political or operational. Ask him why he said that. Now, this is, of course, this is the statement coming in from the US. Of course, they have been adamant that they would like to have the ceasefire in place. If I were to get your response to this coming in from the US.
Well, again, what John Kirby, who's a very, very decent man, I've known him for years, he did not say that the Israelis accepted and then backtracked. What he said was he couldn't understand why they wouldn't accept it. That's a very, very different approach. And again, as the other spokesperson put it, they were aware of the deal. Now, it's quite possible that by not speaking out quickly enough, Netanyahu gave the impression he was willing to go along with it. But again, it just doesn't make sense. 21 days is not going to get 70,000 people home. What they need is a long-term ceasefire. I'm not saying that Hezbollah should disappear. That's a whole other issue. But they need a long-term ceasefire. They need to allow the Lebanese people who've been displaced to go home and the Israelis to go home. 21 days is not going to do either of those.
Right, Mrs. Hakim, you say 21 days is not going to let the displaced people from both the sides return back to their places. Then what, according to you, is a feasible plan? And I also want to seek your assessment that Netanyahu's conduct over the Lebanon ceasefire deal, do you think it was just an extension of how he has handled the Gaza hostage talks? And what kind of an effect will this have on the Gaza ceasefire deal as well?
Well, it's very different. The circumstances are really quite different from those in Gaza. As I said, I personally believe that he could have cut a deal on Gaza months and months ago. Here we're talking about an attack that continues, that Hezbollah has continued to fire rockets and missiles at Israeli civilians. He's the prime minister. He's got to look after his people. Now, how long a ceasefire should last? A ceasefire should last until both sides, the people of both sides, the innocent people of both sides, are able to go back to their homes. And at that point, maybe there's some way of working out some kind of arrangement. I mean, after all said and done, Hezbollah had not gone to war with Israel for quite a number of years for some very good reasons. And there's no reason to assume that they would go to war again. But the key is, however long it takes to get people home on both sides, that's how long the ceasefire should last.
All right, Mr. Hakim, I hear your points. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, the U.S. still seems a little taken aback why Netanyahu has not agreed to it. As you mentioned, it was initially made clear that Israel is aware of the deal, so there was no agreement. Of course, this is something now, it only mounts pressure on the US because now they have two ceasefire deals to achieve on both fronts of Israel. Thank you so much for joining us. There'll be lots more to discuss. We'd love to have you on the show again.
Thank you for having me.